Hi there. Thermal Master has kindly sent me their P2 Pro thermal camera for review, which they claim is the world's smallest. If you have followed thermal cameras, you may have heard this claim elsewhere, but who am I to argue? The packaging has a very premium feel. This looks as if there were two cameras in the box, but the top one is just a macro lens adapter for the camera below. The only other accessory is a short USB-C extension cable. There is a quick start guide in many languages, but sadly no pouch or any other way for storing and carrying the camera. To get started, the protective film over the camera lens needs to be removed. The protection now comes from the lens cap, but that only fits on the macro lens, so you have to store the camera with the macro lens attached. The macro lens as well as the camera itself is fixed focus, nothing to adjust there. The macro lens is held magnetically, which is a neat trick. The lens on the camera itself looks enormous relative to the body because it has a pretty wide field of view. Having a wide view and a macro lens to choose from promises to make this camera pretty versatile. The basic specs. I took that image from a screenshot from the built-in help file because I could not find a downloadable copy. The resolution of the camera is 256 by 192, which is quite good for a thermal camera, and there is the additional image enhancing software called Razor X, which is by default enabled to boost that further. As usual, the measurement range is divided into a low setting, -20 degrees Celsius to 150 degrees, for everyday use and finding hotspots on PCBs, and a high setting for looking at things like soldering irons. The noise equivalent temperature difference, or net D, of lower or equal 40 millikelvins is quite good, meaning that the camera can detect fairly small temperature differences. The rest of the specs are what you would expect. Please pause if you want to read it in more details. The app is called Temp Master. When the camera is plugged in, the app is started and looks like this. You need to tap on the camera button to see an image. The app initializes and then shows the camera picture. I selected the same overnight crystal oscillator PCB as for my review of the Topton TS001 camera. At present, the P2 Pro is running without the macro lens. By default, the app shows the highest and lowest temperature points and the temperature in the center. On the top, you have the X3 button, which turns the imaging enhancing on or off. It's on by default, and turning it off shows that it does a fairly impressive job in edge and contrast enhancement, so it makes sense leaving it on. The other thing you can select is the temperature range. Normally it's set to the low range, which makes sense. You could set it to auto, in which case it would switch automatically if needed, but it takes its time, and I prefer selecting the range manually. You will notice that the high range has a noticeably fuzzier image, which is understandable as the scaling is now geared for temperatures 400 degrees and above, and so the image of this PCB with its much lower temperature loses a lot of detail. At the bottom you can select various color modes. I'm just cycling through and you can pick whatever you fancy. For this camera I normally prefer the grayscale because it makes the readings stand out. Visibility of readings is something the app struggles with, as you will see. The scale indicator has a totally unnecessary second set of on-off buttons. Just clicking on scale would be totally sufficient to turn it on and off. I hope they fix that in the next revision. You can see that the other options in this menu allow more image manipulations such as rotation and mirroring, which is sometimes necessary depending on how you mount the camera. You can, of course, save the picture as an image or capture video. You can include an overlay of the camera built into your phone or tablet, but given the distance between the P2 Pro and the built-in camera, this is of limited use. If you have a steady image, which usually means you have the P2 Pro on a fixed mount, you can select additional points in the image and get the temperature readouts on the top. For lines, you get the min and max and average along the line. The location of min and max are shown as blue and red dots. The same applies to rectangles and circles. Depending on the selected color mode, the drawings, dots, labels and/or readouts are not easy to read. I was hoping to fix that using the color menu, but unfortunately this only changes the readout color. This can be quite a problem and needs to be improved. At the moment your best bet is to switch to one of the grayscale modes, and that makes these advanced measurements much more readable. Unfortunately, the grayscale mode turns the scale indicator off, which is understandable, but if you are now selecting a color mode, the scale stays off and needs to be re-enabled, which is tedious. To finish the menu, the trash can symbol erases all measurements, and the All button brings back the min, max and center readouts from the startup. I mentioned just now that you want the camera stable to be able to do proper measurement points, lines and so on. There is no provision to mount the camera by itself. So here's my setup for this video when shooting without macro lens. The distance to the PCB is about 25 centimeters, just less than a foot, and this is how a saved image from the camera looks. I do realize that many people will have their camera on their smartphone and that might then be mounted on a tripod, so this is not criticizing Thermal Master. Adding the macro lens means you have to move way closer for an in-focus image. The distance to the PCB is now only about 4 centimeters or 1.5 inches. This is a saved video shot by the camera in this setup. The field of depth is very small. For example, it is not really possible to have both the top of the electrolytic cap and the PCB surface fully in focus, even though the cap is just 8 mm tall. Still, being able to use the macro lens to distinguish between closely spaced components is very useful. With or without macro lens, you can zoom in further by using the usual hand gesture. This provides a magnification of up to 15 times, but it's of course an electronic instead of an optical zoom, so it's really not adding more resolution. Note that you have to be out of the camera part of the app and get back to the startup screen to reach settings. This is rather unfortunate, as I will explain in a moment. Touching the settings brings up a set of additional menus. Device Details provides just some basic info and allows a factory reset. Image Settings has these on-off choices. A word on split screen, that just draws faint white lines on your screen, probably intended to help align shots like in some camera viewfinders, but it has no other functions. Watermark can be made visible or not, but it's set to Thermal Master and I have not seen any way to change the text. Temperature setting is probably the most important part of the settings. You can set high and low temperature alarms, nothing special. But variable correction is a really important screen for accurate measurements because you need to set the ambient temperature, distance to the target and the emissivity right to get correct readings. This is where it really hurts that you can only change these after leaving the camera screen because you have set carefully aligned measurement points, lines and so on, and then find that the ambient temperature has changed, or you had to move the camera closer or further away. When leaving the camera screen, all these settings are forgotten. Topdown in their TS001 allows changing these inside the camera screen, which is something the P2 Pro should adopt, or at least remember the camera setup while the app is still running. A second thought is that the distance is only applicable without macro lens. In fact, you can't even enter small distances when using macro. I'm not sure what this means for the accuracy of temperature measurements with the macro lens on. For what it's worth, I have not seen significant variations of the temperature readings of the same object when viewed with or without the macro lens. Gallery brings you to a view of recorded images and videos. If you select an image, you can make that into a report. You get a list of items that can be included or not. Some fields can be edited. Then you get a view of the report. Please note the scrolling text labels, for example in the measurement results section. That is very cute, but the final report is basically just a screenshot of this. And as a result, you get cut-off text labels depending on where in the scrolling you hit the Generate Report button. This is not a serious problem, but I think it makes reports look unprofessional and should be fixed. Searching for hotspots inside a fairly complex machine with a macro lens is possible, but only when using the USB cable, as you have to be very close to the PCB. Even then it's not easy, as I accidentally touched the heat sinks on the vertical PCB on the right. 54 degrees isn't really that hot, but not pleasant either. The macro mode isn't really for scanning a whole machine or PCBs, but examining a specific area in more detail. Without the macro lens, scanning of large PCB areas from further away works quite well. And directly plugged into a smartphone or tablet, the P2 Pro without macro lens is very suitable to do building and installation surveys in a convenient way. You can also use it to see pipe runs hidden underfloor. For this work, it is far better suited than, for example, the Topdon TS001 with its very narrow field of view. So what are my thoughts on the Thermal Master P2 Pro? The app I used was revision 1.17 and it could definitely improve further. The main points are listed here. There should really be a way of adjusting ambient temperature, target distance or emissivity without having to exit camera mode, losing carefully defined measurement points, lines, rectangles or circles. The readability of measurements inside the image could be improved, especially if more colorful themes are selected. And the cut-off scrolling labels don't look very professional in the report generator. All these should be fairly easy to fix with an app update, and in the past Thermal Master has been quick in responding to app improvement suggestions. Another worry of mine is where to put the macro lens for safekeeping while the normal lens is in use, and storing the whole camera, for example, while traveling. A little storage box would be great. Apart from these niggles, the P2 Pro has proven to be quite useful. On top of a USB extension, its small size allows getting into spaces where bigger cameras can't go. It provides a good resolution and thermal sensitivity, and the choice of using a wide angle or macro lens covers a large range of applications. Last not least, in my test, the Thermal Master P2 Pro was working just fine with apps that were meant for other P2 Pro cameras. If you enjoy my videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are many more projects, repairs and reviews coming up, and it would be great if you decided supporting this channel by becoming a Patreon. Thanks for watching.